Hello, and welcome to this Unity tutorial, where today we're going to be covering the post-processing stack inside of Unity. The post-processing stack that Unity provides is a great way to give your project a AAA look for free. So to get started, I went to the asset store and I went ahead and downloaded this Snow Mountain for free. Go ahead and download it if you would like to follow along in this tutorial. The Snow Mountain, if you go inside of the folder once it is downloaded, has a scene folder. In here, select this first mountain one. And then let's go ahead and take a look at the scene view and see what it looks like. We may have to use the middle mouse button and drag it up and out of the mountain so that we can see it. In here we have a gorgeous mountain, and you can see a bunch of other mountains in the background. Now this is actually a skybox. We talked about skyboxes in the Terrain Basics video on this channel, but as a quick recap, you can add a skybox to your scene by going to Window, Rendering, Lighting Settings, and here you'll notice we have this skybox chosen here. We don't have a sun source, however typically you're going to use the directional light as the sun source. It kind of mimics it. And we also have the fog enabled, so that's going to give it kind of this misty look in the background. If we were to uncheck that, when we approach it at a distance, you're going to be able to see that fog really play into effect. If we change the values a little bit, you'll be able to see it. For example, if we bring that to 0, let's go ahead and generate our lighting. And let's also go ahead and bring this up just a wee bit. Notice when I changed the fog settings, the mountain became invisible. Well, that's because we're using a linear fog, so you can imagine a linear graph is going to go up at a constant rate slope. So we said start at position 0, which is essentially where you are, your position in the game world, and then the maximum distance of the fog is going to be 10 units away. So naturally the fog is going to encompass most of the scene. If we increase this value, you can see the fog goes further away, and then it goes more or less completely away. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what the fog was, a little bit more information. One of the things that we like to focus on, especially when doing terrain generation, is we want the user to be immersed in the scene. Fog is a really good way to help with that. You have a decent sized terrain, such as this mountain scene, but eventually the user is going to reach the end of the world. The end of the world may be the end of the terrain where it just falls off into a void. There are a few tricks that developers use to try and avoid that. First, we prevent the player from ever reaching the edge. An example may be there are walls keeping the player within a predefined area. You have actual mountains in the background that the player cannot go up, and thus they can't see the outer side of the world. You could have an invisible force field, and with the invisible force field you can also use the fog in combination with it to hide the player's vision of the edge of the world. So those are just some cool tricks you'll learn about in upper level courses, specifically the video game design course. But in case you wanted to use that, I did want to talk about that briefly. Okay, so if we take a look at this, let's take a look at our game view. While this does not look very good, we're actually inside the mountain, so we are going to click on the camera in the hierarchy on the left side of your screen. Let's go ahead and change the values, specifically the transform of the camera, and let's position this a wee bit out. So we're going to move it on the Z. Let's make it a little bit more negative, and then we're also going to increase it on the Y, just so we can get the mountain a little bit more in focus in the center of our scene. So that actually looks beautiful. I realize I have this stats window open here. Let me go ahead and close that. What this is, though, in case you're curious of why I had it open, it gives you some very useful information. There is quite a bit of information here that we're not going to talk about in this video, but specifically it tells you how much audio is resonating from the scene, as well as how many frames per second you're getting. This is going to be especially important when you get to larger projects and you start having a lot of game objects in the project itself, you're going to notice your frame rate is going to start to drop. There are some optimization techniques that we can use to be able to increase your frame rate that we'll talk about in our Unity best practices video on this channel. Alright, so that's enough for the stats at the moment. Let me go ahead and close that, and let's actually get into the topic of today's video, which is the post-processing stack. Now, right off the bat, this scene looks very good. It's a very high detailed mountain. It has a skybox in the background, and we want to make it even better, and we can do that using the post-processing stack. So what we need to do is we're going to open up the package manager. If you go to the file menu in the upper left hand corner of Unity, select window, drop down to package manager, go ahead and open that up. It'll likely open up as a windowed window. I think I maximized it previously, but you can drag it around anywhere that you would like. It is important to make sure that you have all packages selected. And this is going to be a list of all the things that Unity includes by default that you can download. And I would encourage you to take a look through this list, as there are some amazing things that you can download. Specifically, there are some VR stuff as well as some multiplayer stuff. But what we're going to be focusing on, of course, is the post-processing. So let me go ahead and bring my window over. I got this window a bit too big on my screen. Alright, you're going to want to go ahead and click the install button in the lower right hand corner when you have the post-processing selected. If you don't see it right off the bat, again, make sure you have all packages selected, and then go ahead and search for post, and it should pop up there. If you are not able to see this, it should be available on the school machines. However, if you have your own personal version of Unity, it may be a possibility that it is not updated fully, as they just released a more stable version of post-processing. We're using Unity 2019.4, the latest stable build of Unity, available in the labs as well. Let's go ahead and install this. Likely you had to download it first. I use post-processing quite a bit in my other projects because it adds so much to them that it is one of the first things that I import when I actually start creating a new project, as it's really going to take your project to the next level. Examples of things that post-processing can do: it's going to add, for example, a filter around the camera is one option to give it a more focused look. You'll see what I mean when we actually view it. You can do motion blurring, so when the camera is moving, the environment will actually become blurred a little bit. And let's actually go ahead and just jump right into it to see all of the effects that post-processing has. Alright, so what we're going to want to do first is, typically I just put them on the main camera. You can put them on a separate object, an empty game object, if you wanted, but just for the time being, we'll keep it very simple and go ahead and add both components. The components that I'm talking about, if you click on Add Component and go ahead and search for Post, you're going to notice there's three colorful icons that are going to appear. Specifically, we're going to be working with the layer and the volume. So go ahead and choose Layer, and then also go ahead and select volume. So you're going to want both post-processing layer and post-processing volume on your main camera. Now, before we actually get into the effects of this, what we're going to want to do is set up a separate layer that the camera is going to use for post-processing. We have a video on this channel specifically talking about physics inside of Unity, where we talk in depth about the layer system. We also talk about tags at the same time. Layers are a very powerful way to handle physics inside of your game, which is why we talk about it in that video. But we're going to add the post-processing effects onto their own layer. So go ahead, and I did that a little bit fast, I apologize. With the main camera selected in the hierarchy, in the inspector on the right hand side of your screen, select the layer drop down, and then select Add Layer. Go to the first available slot, which is layer 8 by default. Go ahead and type in post-processing. It really doesn't matter what the name of the layer is. The only thing important is that we're going to put the camera onto this layer. Unity by default reserves these first 8 slots starting at index 0 up to 7, and it uses these layers for its own things, which is why we cannot override them. But Unity gives you an additional handful of layers that you can use for your own purposes. Alright, selecting back in the main camera, let's go ahead and reselect layer and now select the post-processing layer to add it onto it. Perfect. Now the reason why we had to do that is because the post-processing layer, which we just created here, we're actually going to go ahead and on the post-processing layer component on the main camera, go ahead and select layer and then choose the post-processing layer. And then this is where we really get into some fun and we get to see the effects that we can apply to the camera. Before we get into the post-processing volume where all the magic is going to happen, I briefly want to talk about the anti-aliasing. So anti-aliasing is specifically going to help with your rigid edges. So if you zoom up really close on a shadow or something like that, you may notice that it's going to be blocky by nature. The anti-aliasing is going to help that and help make your shadows and more or less edges look significantly better by having that on. There are 3 different types that you can use: FXAA, SMAA, and TAA. I would encourage you to look these up on the internet for a bit more detail than I can go into in this video. If you want your game to look good but also perform pretty well, I recommend the FXAA. If you want it to look very good but it may cost you a bit of performance, choose the SMAA. If you are designing your project for a really beefy computer or just a higher end computer, SMAA is going to give you one of the best results, and you can actually set the quality low, medium, and high. We'll leave it on high for the time being. And now the post-processing volume, this is where all the fun is going to happen. What we're going to do is we're going to check this is global, because we want to make this volume global so that it is applied to the entire scene, not just this object. So go ahead and check this. And the weight is 1 because we want the full effect of it to be on there. And let's go ahead and create a new profile. Now you can see here that you can actually select other profiles. If you search on the Unity Asset Store, there are going to be many post-processing volumes that you can download and use, and maybe if we have time in this video we'll take a look at some of them. They're already pre-configured for some of the best results, and you can get some really amazing effects from there. We're just going to go ahead and click New. Alright, so now that we have our main camera profile set up in the post-processing volume, let's go ahead and add a new effect by clicking the Add Effect button at the very bottom here. And it might be hidden behind my name. Let me go ahead and position this a little bit more over so that we can see this. Go ahead and select Add Effect Unity. And the first one that we're going to choose is let's do the vignette at the very bottom. When we add this effect onto it, you'll go ahead and select the All button. It's grayed out next to the None. We're going to go ahead and toggle these overrides on. And what this is going to do for us is it's going to give you a kind of tint around the camera. If you notice, when we increase the intensity of it, it's almost like you're closing an eye. Almost. It's like an iris of a camera. What some developers like to do is they'll add just a little bit of grayness. You can see around the corners of it, just like this. And that kind of focuses in on the primary object of your scene. You can play with the other settings here, the roundness, how much do you want it, as well as the center and even the color. So red is a really popular one. For example, if you're making like first-person shooter, zombie game, anything like that, you can toggle on and off this vignette setting, and this is really good for like when the player takes damage. You can flash this on and off. It gives the impression that they're taking damage. I personally used that in the past and it's looked very well, but of course you can change it to any color. You can do like an underwater effect by having it blue or something like that, but We'll just leave it at black for the time being, but please feel free to take a look at that. And then go ahead and let's choose another one here. We can try ambient occlusion is always a good one. Let's go ahead and click the all on here. Now the ambient occlusion is going to give you more contrast per se on your shadows in your scene, or more contrast based on the edges in your scene. If you just play with the intensity, you'll of course see this a little bit more. If we bring that all the way up, it becomes very defined and it kind of ruins the scene. We can just add a little bit to it. Just by adding a smidge, you're going to get a little bit more contrast around your edges, just like that, especially with these lighting effects, just like that. And then of course you could use that to change the color, and you can get some really interesting effects going on with that. So this is always a popular one to pick. We'll go ahead and just increase it very slightly to give a little bit more contrast. Alright, the next one here is auto exposure. We'll go ahead and add that, and then we'll go ahead and just select all. Now this one is going to play with your lighting a little bit more, your minimum and maximum values here for the luminance in your scene for their exposure. So this is going to be more along the lines of if you have an indoor-outdoor type of scene where your character is making transitions between the two, it's going to give it a more realistic look when you go between two different illumination profiles, such as outdoors where it's very sunny to a dark room indoors. That's what this auto exposure is going to do. Typically I have my settings where I'll bring this line all the way up, I decrease this one all the way down and increase this one all the way up. This one is harder to show off without actually having a first-person character and being able to go between an indoor and outdoor scene, but I would recommend using this on like a first-person controller or something of that nature. I'm just going to toggle that off, but I did want to talk about what it was a little bit more in detail. Lens distortion, go ahead and add that one on there. Go ahead and select the all again, and here you can just play with that. As you can imagine, we're viewing Unity through a camera, so if we put a different lens on the camera, you can kind of imagine some pretty insane effects that we're going to have. And of course, you can play with what that's going to look like. I don't really want a lens distortion on this, but if you do, go ahead and add it on there. And then you can go ahead and click onto these other ones. They're not going to be as easy to show. Let me go ahead and add on the color grading one. Let me go ahead and select that. Now, one of the things about color grading is we have different color spaces and which our projects are rendered in. I would encourage you to take a look at the difference between gamma coloring and linear coloring. Typically, I will set my project up to be linear, so if you go to the Edit Project Settings, under the Player, in the Other Settings, the color space here is just a different way of rendering colors in your scene. Again, I would encourage you to take a look at the two different ways, but to describe it in just a sentence, it's really about how your textures are going to interact with the natural light in your scene. Linear by default looks a lot better. There are some other things that you're going to hear about in other videos on this channel, such as different pipelines that you can use, such as the high definition and the low definition rendering pipelines that are becoming more and more popular. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but we changed that to linear just because the color grading specifically was complaining about that. If you go ahead and click that on all of our settings here, we can start to play with them. You can see that we can sort of change the temperature of the scene. So now it's like a cold, wintry night or day, I guess. It's all blue, but then it could be like an autumn evening. You can play with the tint, get some really weird colors. and you can, as you imagine, just play around with the effects. Your scene may not look anything like what it started after you've applied a lot of these effects. I mean, look at this compared to what we had before when we unchecked this to that. I mean, same scene, but completely different in terms of that. Alright, there are a few other effects on here. I would encourage you just play around with them. You'll have the most fun doing it that way. There are a lot of profiles on the asset store. If you just search for post-processing, you should be able to find some. I personally have this post-processing files, one that I really enjoy. If you select the free assets though, you should be able to find a few of them on here that you could use. Let's see here. I just want to show you how easy it is to use some of these. Of course, if you pump money into it, you're going to get some better volumes, but everything that they do, you can do yourself. It's just an immense amount of tweaking of all of those different effects working together to give you the best possible look on your scene. Alright, so we'll just quickly wait for this to import, and then we'll just click onto our main camera and see what it has. Okay. So if we scroll back up here, let's take a look at the post-processing. Let's see if it gave us any additional ones. Looks like we have some conflicts down here in the console. I'm going to go ahead and clear those out. Looks like we have an error in one of our scripts. Let me go ahead and fix this error. Will be a really good time to debug this together. Again, this is kind of near the end of the video, so if I'm for the most part all done. I'm just going to go ahead and debug this last part if you're interested. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any questions, please leave your comment down in the comment section or reach out to your instructor with any questions. Alright, so the error that we have here, excuse me for that, is in the post-processing volume that this min attribute is an ambiguous reference between post-processing and Unity Engine. So we double-clicked on this, and we take a look here, get rid of this pop-up. So we can see that we have the Unity Engine and post-processing. I know that this is going to be using the Unity Engine, so we're just going to go ahead and type Unity Engine dot min attribute in front of all of these. Go ahead and add it there, and then add it there as well. If we go back here, we'll go ahead and we'll say no thanks for the time being. Looks like we have a lot more errors. So now we have event type dot mouse down is obsolete. Use the mouse down instead. Let's see if it's upgradable. So if we go to assets, run API updater, let's go ahead and see if we can update these references automatically. Again, assets, run API updater. Unity will try its best to fix all the errors, and it looks like it actually fixed all those errors for us, so that's perfect. I just wanted to see if that would give us any more profiles. Looks like it did not, unfortunately. So that is perfectly okay. Let's see if we can find anything else on the asset store. Sometimes, I should have read that one a little bit closer. We might not get everything that we bargained for in there. This one is a little bit too big at 228 megabytes for this video. Let's continue. Post-processing effects. Okay, this one's only 9 megabytes. Let's download it and just see what it has inside of it. Real quick here as we finish up the video. Importing a complete project. Well, you probably wouldn't want to do this by default. Let's just go ahead and import it though. You got to be very careful with these packages. Like how it just prompted us to import a whole project, and it was said that it was going to overwrite our project settings. Especially with larger projects, you typically don't want to do that. This is just a tutorial video, so I don't mind doing that. But with your larger projects, you have to back them up constantly, especially before you go to the asset store and start downloading a bunch of assets. I've ruined a lot of big projects that way, unfortunately, and you just got to be careful about that sometimes. Alright, so with the main camera selected, let's see if we have any new profiles here. Looks like we have a new one. Let's go ahead and go to our game so we can see what this one looks like, and let's select the new one here. Alright, so this one is kind of more of a nice lighter type of effect on here, kind of like a bright winter day on this mountain. Alright, so thank you for sticking with me, debugging with me, and downloading off the Asset Store. I hope the post-processing tutorial was very interesting and you got a lot out of it, as well as some just common debugging techniques and hopefully things that can get you out of any problems that you have. But of course, reach out to your instructor. They're going to be the best resource for you. But you can always reach out to us as well. If you post a comment, we'll receive an email about it, and I will try to get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you very much.